Thank you for joining us, Dr. Hudson, and visiting Precision Medicare today. Dr. Hudson is the Dean of the College of Science at Rochester Institute of Technology. Let's start with the question. Precision medicine is advancing very quickly, and I would like to think about your perspective about the involvement of technological advancement that can improve applications of precision medicine.
So I think in an academic setting, right, certainly our part of our mission, so to speak, is to educate students. But I also think more importantly, we have to inspire students to protect and inspire um, students to be involved or be interested in things that we as professionals now don't even know will exist in the future. For example, what will be the next pandemic, whether it's 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 10 years from now, who knows? But certainly having the talents there ready to address those issues is super important. And can you imagine if when we had the COVID pandemic, if there weren't any virologists around, right? So it's very, very important that as academicians or industry professionals, we keep in mind the talents, the talent of pool of individuals that necessary to be at the seat of the table to solve issues. And in my line of work, I like often share with our scholars that I think for science to work well, we don't need everyone at the bench. While personally I love to be at the bench and love to do experiments and love to do the traditional science, so to speak, right? We need individuals who understand ethics, who understand policy, who understand advocacy, and also individuals who are good communicators, right? That I like to share that as scientists, we know how to disseminate well. I'm not really sure we know how to communicate well, and there's certainly a difference between dissemination and communication, so to speak.
Absolutely, and I think the interaction between the commercial entity as well as academic entity is playing an important role in that.
Sure. Yeah.
Often what we see in the commercial space, the technology advancement and the evolution of scientific breakthrough are way faster in the within industry. And there is big proportion or big opportunity for the industry setting to communicate with the academic entities and let them know that that today we're standing at this stage as far as vaccine development, as far as and what is needed for analysis pipeline or anything else like that. And then communication between the academic setting as well as industry with industry is becoming very important, because we can, through that communication, we can raise awareness and let the academic partners know that what is the next generation of workforce that will be well needed.
Sure. Well, I think, thank you for sharing. I'm heartened to hear that message, because I think the relationship between industry and in the academic setting has to be a symbiotic one, right? And I think it has to be a mutualistic symbiotic relationship where both entities benefit. As you might be aware, the evolution in industry is a lot faster than is in academia, just because of the way initially, traditionally, those those infrastructure was set up. And so, one of the best models that I know of, and I'm certainly a champion of, is when industry and academia collaborate and partner, and they both kind of feed each other. This kind of bidirectional or mutualistic relationship where you all are interested in a certain talent pool, but also you're at the forefront and having the resources to take the chances and the high risk, high reward kind of mechanism.
Absolutely.
Whereas in the academic setting, it's probably a little bit different. We don't have the infrastructure to kind of test things en masse and scale it, so to speak. But certainly the talent is there. So one of the things I would love to see, with companies like yours and others, will be you all inform us in the terms of not only the talents that is needed, but what are the next kind of things in industry that's going to be at the forefront, and then we could integrate that into a curriculum and change it in real time. Right? And so when we have graduates, right, they are kind of career ready, so to speak.
Sure, absolutely. And I think the other arm, each innovation does need infrastructure. So when you have an innovative approach for developing anything or building anything new does require infrastructure, just like making this similar to what you were gonna launch out, like as a small community or a small country. And policymakers, involvement of policymakers are another big component where I think that the innovation can get translated to impact. Because unless we have the proper policies in place, we will not be able to bring that innovation and offer them. In this case, let's just use the example in healthcare industry. If you are inventing a new approach to advanced precision medicine, if you have anything new to offer to community, but the lack of infrastructure and policies that are well needed to make those accessible and equitable to patients, you will not see the real impact. So a combination of like working commercial groups with the industry, and as well as the payers, the insurance companies that are providing care for the patient, working with academia and policymaker, all of them are intact sure that if one piece is missing, you will not be able to see the real impact. Sure. And that's what we've been experiencing in reality when we started precision medicine care. The other component that I think is super important is basically education and lack of awareness between like all the entities that are stakeholders that are utilizing these tools. Let's say precision medicine. If the medical student that is going to the medical school but haven't heard of that terminology, doesn't know the indications for that, doesn't know how to offer those to the patient later on when they go and they become professional, then we will not see the real impact. Sure. So as part of our activities these days, we are trying to also make an awareness and work with the professional societies to educate both patient as well as the providers and let them know that how these tools can really help patients and make a necessary impact that is needed. Right. To be seen in healthcare. Let's just get a bit more technical with you. Sure. And your projects that you're doing, because I know you're doing a lot of interesting projects. Talking about the Markov model and mathematical models that can help to predict the next generation of epidemic. I would love to hear about that project that you're doing. It's very exciting.
So in my personal research, I'm a biochemist by training. And one of the projects I work on is related to antibiotic resistance, and certainly with respect to the antibiotic resistant crisis, it comes from two fronts. Number one, companies got out of the game, of the antibiotic discovery game, many years ago. Simply, I think, we kind of had antibiotic for a long time that worked really, really well. Right, and so there wasn't any incentive for companies to get back into the space. And certainly there are stewardship issues, kind of overuse and abuse of antibiotic use. But I also think, and I think this is where the government comes in, is that when you do certain kind of research, right, are you doing it for profit, so to speak, or are you doing it for humanity, so to speak, right? And certainly in the antibiotic, it's not a chronic, you use them, you develop it, you use them for a short period of time, and then you kind of move on, right? It's not a chronic, you don't certainly prescribe them for chronic illness, so to speak. So one of the bottlenecks in antibiotic usage, or just the medicine itself, is that these organisms are very, very smart, and they evolve rapidly to circumvent and be resistant, or be less, or the drug are less effective, so to speak. Yeah. So I'm interested in certain projects that actually use predictive AI and other tools, one of which is using hidden Markov models and others to kind of predict what the evolutionary timeline, so to speak, is going to happen, and not only just how long, but where, what amino acids or mutations are going to cause changes in amino acids, and being able to model the structure of those proteins to see, are they going to circumvent the antibiotics or other drugs, so to speak. I do know that you're interested in another aspect of this, which I think is super important, is the quantum aspect of it, because right now the traditional computational power that we use, right, obviously it works, but the time scale is probably not as effective as using kind of quantum AI and other tools. So for me
Absolutely.
personally, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on where
Of
you think
course.
that line of work is going.
Yeah, and I mean, as you mentioned, quantum AI, a combination of quantum as well as AI, I guess that it gives us enough computational power and learning machinery in order for us to understand the genome in depth. And not just genome at the level of unidirectional genome level, but also we can understand the human as a biological system where we look at the sequencing data, DNA sequencing data, but also epigenomic layer, as well as proteomics data. And then combining that with the clinical information, lifestyle modifiers and all that, will allow us to understand the human in more depth rather than what we do today in clinical practice, where we sequence and DNA, and majority of our reports and results are based on the sequencing information. So the interesting part about quantum is quantum computing is the infrastructure and the capacity of that technology that allows us to look at all these massive data that we will not be able to do or analyze in the regular computer system. So quantum computing system allows us to look at all these massive data in real time, add multi-layer, which obviously is going to improve our understanding about us as a human biological system. I think this project became more important to me in clinical settings simply because that newborn genomic initiative has been launched in the US. And I do forecast that at some point we may see this project to go and be offered as a routine standard of care to every newborn that is being born. And by the time that we get to that stage, we do need the analytical pipeline to analyze and understand the massive data that we generate. So I think quantum computing technology will allow us to look at all those information in the future.
Fascinating. I have just a quick follow-up with respect to, so we have the sequencing technology, right? And we have the computing technology, or will have the computing technology and infrastructure soon. I'm just curious about the ethical aspect of this. For example, obviously, genomes are going to be available, and obviously there's going to be some predictive tools to kind of predict whether someone is more inclined to develop a mutation that leads to certain diseases. I'm just curious to your thoughts in terms of what do you think the insurance landscape or the patient, from a patient protection standpoint, like, who will have access to the data, how will people use the data, and how will insurance companies and others use the data to inform their decisions going forward?
Sure. I mean, it's such a fascinating question that you brought up. I know one of the dilemmas right now between the policymakers is to bring proper regulatory framework for AI technology. And obviously, we're talking quantum would be a next generation of technology that we have to consider and think about what are the proper regulatory framework or policies that we need in order to make these technologies offer them to patients or at the population level. But it is a great question. I personally think that quantum technology and in any technology in general does have advantage and disadvantage. In this case, lacking a regulatory framework that protects patient to stay immune and not to have misusage of the information is something that needs to be developed. And if I get a chance to talk with any policymakers, I always say that please take this very seriously because we're talking about the harm, potential damage, and significant harm to the next generation of the human beings by just misusage of the data.
It's fascinating to hear that answer, because one of the things we certainly champion in our curricula, various curricula at RIT, is that, and in the College of Science, is that for science to work well, we don't need everyone at the bench, right? We need the policymakers and the ethicists and the advocates and the people who are well informed in order to guide the future of science. So I think, science is about just not doing the work, so to speak. It's about the implementation
Absolutely.
and ultimately the people's and the lives that it affects through the discoveries and the regulatory aspect and the ethical aspect, so to speak. So
Sure.
fascinating to hear.
This is definitely time to think about all those things because technology advancement is just rapidly evolving.
Sure.
But yet for us to, in order to bring the proper regulatory framework and policies or bills, it takes many years.
Sure.
And if we're thinking about the technology advancement, using it for clinical use, this is the time to think about that and take it very seriously and bring it proper.
I also think too, is given that we're living in a global society right now, right, which is to ensure that things are coordinated not only in the United States but across the world, right? In sense, a patient could, decide really, do they want to get treatment here or get treatment somewhere else, and so the kind of the high level things, in my opinion, should be kind of coordinated. Obviously, there may be like nuances and differences based on country and culture and practices, et cetera. But I think like the high level thing, for example, like hopefully like universally, a patient will not be ineligible for insurance, right? Because their genome predisposed them or, so forth and so on. Like, I think that should be universal. Whereas
Absolutely.
like, more
Yes.
local and
Yeah.
things could kind of change. I think we should have some high level humanistic aspect.
So what do you think is the glitch exactly? Where is the gap is coming from? Because we all, as a scientist, as we understand the importance of having these, technologies and make them accessible.
Sure.
In this case, if we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about patient. Where is the glitch? Why there is a lot of miscommunication between the insurance companies that's supposed to bring these tools and innovations and offer it to patients, but yet we see that there are a lot of delays. Even though that you show some cost effectiveness for some of those approach, again, takes years in order to bring the right, to communicate with the insurance companies so that they understand the importance of like offering this type of services to the patient. Why do you think there is a miscommunication?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I'm not an expert in the field or in this line of work, so to speak, but I think one of the things that I think could be the crux of the issue, right, is that there is really no coordination or entities coordinating each other. So each industry or each sector is kind of left to their own devices, right? And it's because some of them are for profits, right? They're going to make decisions based on what's best for them and their shareholders or their companies. Whereas on the other side, another entity might say, hey, look, we're just here to help humanity, irrespective of the cost, so to speak. Right. So this is where I think if you look at government's regulatory aspect, which you mentioned a couple of times, which is very important, is that there has to be someone in charge who's going to say these are the rules of the game. It's no different than sports, right? There is a commissioner and there is a league that says, this is a foul, this is not a foul, this is a strike, this is not a strike, right?
Yeah.
So someone really has to be there to be the umpire or the referee to say, this is not acceptable, this is acceptable, and try to come to like an accord to ensure that we have the ground rules. I think the thing with technology is that because the pace of innovation always lags behind the ethical aspect, the regulatory aspect, the other kind of things that are grown with, which is at some point in time we have to kind of pause and step back and says, here is what's going to be allowed and here's what's going to be allowed. I think once the carriage gets in front of the horse, so to speak, then it's hard to work backwards, so to speak. And in our line of work, it's no different than authorship, right? So the best time to talk about authorship on a project is before you write the paper, right? Before the project begins, and say, here are the ground rules. If this happens, then these individuals are authors, and if this happened, then this person is the first author, the corresponding author, so forth and so on. Right? When there is no discussion and no agreement up front, and then the science is done, and then the paper is written, and if all those things are not adjudicated out front, here's where you have a kind of a miscommunication, in my opinion, and you could be problems because rather than focusing on the entity, you're fighting over or pushing, pulling over things that really are not important, but at the sense of it, not at the heart of what we do in the science, so to speak. So, yeah. I think in every major advancement in science, I remember reading when cloning and molecular biology was first being developed, right? There was a lot of the things that, the science was so new at the time. There was like, but, what about tracking and regulatory and who's in charge and how do we dispose and how do
Yes.
we do all of these things? And I think we're at kind of a similar point in time in history right now where technology is just, it's just so fast that the other aspects just can't keep up.
Especially with the AI, and
That's right, exactly.
now we're talking about quantum, and I hope that we as human beings can catch up with all this advancement.
Sure, exactly. And I think this is where I think the inspirational aspects of or exposing students. So at RIT, we have a fantastic co-op program, right, where we send students off to get embedded and get experiential learning outside of the university. We certainly have it inside of the university as well, but to kind of see the other aspects of the things that you all deal with in industry, whether it's hey, it's just not all pipetting and doing all the science, but it's the advocacy and the ethical aspect and the compliance and the throughputs and all of the things that a company will deal with. That is very, very hard to replicate in an academic setting, so to speak.
Yeah. In other words, innovation is just one piece of the entire picture.
Exactly.
In order to see an impact and change, this entire arms have to work with each other.
Yes, exactly.
To see the impact.
Exactly. Right. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think when you have industry, the governments, and academia partnering, I think every aspect you kind of see the best product, right? And the COVID example was that, right?
Yeah.
Right? You could see
Exactly.
how, albeit we had to pivot really quickly, right? You could see that if academia couldn't solve it on its own, industry couldn't solve it on its own, and the government couldn't fund it on its own, right? It took this kind of triangulated, coordinated effort, right? And they did some wonderful things, like they make science accessible. So they remove the barriers for accessibility, right? The government in real time made changes to fast track testing and development and so forth and so on, right? And so we have the wherewithal, we have obviously the infrastructure. I think we just have to do the willingness in order to be bold and change. And I don't think we have time to kind of argue about the old models and the old paradigms. I think going forward, we have to just be bold and say, this is the new way of getting things done, big things done, all right? And I think each one of those entities, I don't think could do it on its own, but certainly collaboratively, we'll get there, right?
Absolutely. Cannot agree on that.
Yeah.
Right. This is exactly correct. Going back to precision medicine,
Sure.
if you're going to start a country that has a health system that wants to be built from scratch, and you want to offer healthcare through precision medicine to that community, what are the possibilities? What are the steps toward that direction? How you're going to build that program?
I think on the onset, I would first start with educating the public on what it is, right? I think there is, I think one of the things that we do, I always share with our colleagues that one of the hardest things that we do is to teach, because a lot of times we come in with some assumptions that if we don't vet at the onset, we certainly don't do as good as a job as we need to, which is, I think you may understand, but I don't know that for sure. And so if I was going to start a health system in a new country, so to speak, the first thing I would do is to educate individuals to the point where they understand it. And certainly I mentioned before that as scientists, we have a knack of kind of disseminating, really not communicating, because I think we were trained like that, right? I mean, you write a proposal and I'm writing it for 4 people to say fund it. Right. Write a paper, I'm writing it for 4 people to say publish it, right? But science is a service, and I think science is for humanity. And so the first thing that I would do is to educate individuals of what it is and what it means to be in terms of precision or personalized medicine, so to speak. Then I think the next arm of it is to kind of to build the infrastructure and the kind of the talent, right? And so if you're certainly in a country, in order to to deliver on that promise, right, you certainly need the people to deliver on the promise. So ensure that the academic setting, the industry setting, and the government setting are all aligned in that sense. And then there's some practical things I would do. For example, like ensure that all newborns are sequenced, right? Ensure that the medical setting, whether it's nurses or PAs or doctors or wherever we're training or scientists, so to speak, that this is kind of integrated into the curricula. This is kind of integrated into their training. And I think when you train medical professionals, you have to ask yourself this question: are you training the doctors for today, or are you training the doctors for tomorrow? And I think certainly you have to be a combination
Brilliant
of both.
comment.
Yeah, you have to do a combination of both. Just like a quarterback,
Yeah.
the analogy that I have, the quarterback doesn't throw the ball where the receiver is. They're going to throw the ball where the receiver is going to be, right? And I think because of the pace of change, certainly you need to train and mentor future physicians and medical professionals who are adaptable, who could kind of see things coming and kind of make changes in real time. So there are certain proactive and reactive parts of it, but I would hedge that the model has to kind of switch to be to ensure there's more agility on the other side, because 5 years after you're trained, right, the entire system, like, so for example,
Sure.
Doctors who weren't trained with AI, right, are now like, how can I use it in my practice? How can I use it to make calls? How can I trust it, right? How can I verify it, right, and so forth and so on. So I think that's part of the system, from soup to nuts. I think you have to build it from scratch, or de novo, as we will say in biochemistry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So academia is playing a big part in this.
Yes.
And I agree with you.
Yeah.
Because everything goes back to education.
Yes. Yeah.
The fact that today still some of our doctors do not know, they don't have limited understanding about the indication for genetic testing.
Sure.
That sometimes could be saving lives. Because there are some life-threatening conditions, for instance, in a cardiac setting, there are a cluster of patients if they carry a pathogenic variant in some of the cardiac genes, they may go through, individuals can have a risk for cardiac event.
Sure.
And yet, if you talk with cardiologists, they may not even be aware that genetic testing could be a solution that should be offered to at least to the families that are considered as high risk. Other examples, cancer. We all know that some cancers are happening at the high frequency in population. So we should have a proactive approach about that to detect the individuals that are at risk and offer those tests and make them accessible.
Sure.
If they meet the medically necessary indications for going under testing. A lot of educations that are well needed, I think, in our field that we are facing at our company every day. That you speak with the cardiologists, you speak with the oncologists, but yet they really may not fully aware of the indication of some of these important tests that could be offered to patients.
And I think too, I mean, you said something fascinating in terms of the educational aspect, but I think at the bottom, when you're looking at the bottom rung of the ladder, so to speak, it always builds on trust. Right?
Yep.
And so in certain parts of the world, right, there are just kind of intrinsic distrust of people doing new things, right? And so how to erode that, and it certainly starts with education in terms of explaining, and who gets to do the teaching, and the education part is very, very also important, right? And so giving certain historical events that have happened with new technologies, or people doing science, or people experimenting, right? There were certain groups that were obviously mistreated and done wrong, so to speak. And so how to kind of build that trust. And I think that's the crux of medicine, is you go to your primary care physician or any medical profession because you trust that individual, right? And so how to ensure that that's not eroded when, a patient may ask you, is it your decision or is it AI's decision? Right? And somebody's going to have to explain that to a patient. That no. It could be the AI is helping us, but trust me, based on my training. And then you have individuals who, no, I want you to make the call, right? And so forth and so on. So I think it's going to be the tug of war, so to speak, but I think we'll get better over time.
But also, as you said, the mistrust that sometimes can get unfortunately spread out very quickly
Sure.
within the population because some groups are doing
Sure.
wrong. A good example of some of the commercial companies that offer that, for instance, have genetic testing that helps patients to understand and calculate their risk for cancer, for
Sure.
breast cancer. And people are going under this testing without really educating themselves. Where are they getting tested? Is this lab that I am sending my test or a specimen, is it accountable?
Sure.
Is that qualified laboratory?
Sure.
And obviously the byproduct of that would be the mistrust in the population.
Sure.
Now that the entities that are doing good for the community and humanity have to reverse that perspective and say, hey, I am the good guy, I'm not a bad guy. So it's very unfortunate. We've seen that multiple examples of that people, as soon as people hear genetic testing, they assume that there would be a misuse of their data.
Sure.
They assume that their data will be sold to another entity. They assume that they're going to be discriminated. There are a lot of misconceptions that are associated with some of those terminologies. Genetic testing is, unfortunately, is one of them. Simply because that genetic testing was not being offered at the population scale and for a screening by the entities that are qualified to offer those tests.
I'll tell you a quick story. So I recently had some genetic testing done, and the results came back. And the people that gave me the readout had no idea my background, right? I'm just a regular patient, or, they know my. And so they were explaining to me about this mutation. And I asked the individual giving me the readout, I said, is that a synonymous or non-synonymous mutation? And like, how do you know about that? Right? And I explained to her, I said, so they explained to me this particular mutation. I goes, well, it's fine. And she's like, explain more. And so I explained to her that, hey, this one change, right? It's not going to switch out the amino acid. So it's either here nor there. And, she was fascinating. I said, like, how do you know that? I was like, well, I gave her my background, right? And I think this is the kind of level of education and communication that is needed to the public, right? Because if you give a readout from a genetic test and you tell the average patient that they have a mutation, they automatically thinks the worst, right?
Absolutely.
But if that changes, a leucine to an isoleucine, right? It could be either here nor there, right? Or if it changes it, from a big bulky amino acid to another big bulky amino acids, or arginine to a lysine is either here nor there, right? So this is the level of communication that I want to convey, is that when you communicate to patients, is to educate them from the ground up, not assuming that they know the severity levels between mutations and the side chain of the amino acids and so forth and so on. So even the term that you use, which is just mutations, you have a mutation, right? It's, that word is automatically linked to cancer. That old word is automatically linked to something else. So I think we just,
which may not be the fact.
Which may not be the fact, right?
Absolutely.
And then that prohibits people from getting testing, because it's like, well, I'm fear of just getting any news. And so forth and so on. So how do we kind of erode that fear and trust in science and so forth?
And there are some regulatory where we have GINA, for instance. GINA is protecting individuals who are going under testing based on their genetic test result. But I agree also that those regulatory framework needs to get improved. Especially with the rapid evolvement of genomic, as in the setting of newborn genomic screening or any other setting, genetic testing and genomic testing are rapidly evolving. So we need to think about the regulatory that are needed to protect patients' information and privacy. So everything goes back to education, and I cannot, I guess that we can talk for hours, but thank you so very much for the time today. Before we end this conversation, do you have any question? Is there any other thing that you may want to share?
Yeah, I think, just real quick here as we wrap up, I think, what you're all doing in your company is wonderful work. I think certainly the future, in terms of where the field is going, I think this is just kind of like the next logical progression in what you're doing. And PMC and your colleagues here are certainly very, very important in all aspects, and not only on the science side, but I'm aware that you all are doing advocacy and kind of other kind of work from the education front to help building the workforce, so forth. So thank you. It's
Thank
always
you so
fun to
much.
and enjoyable to see our alums doing great things and be leaders in the forefront of their field. And as I said, and you and your colleagues in particular provide an inspiration for our current students, including myself and others
Oh,
too.
thank you so
But I
very
think
much.
students kind of see where their degrees and where their training and mentoring could end up in
Sure.
having real impacts, which is at the time of training is not always apparent.
Of course
So when
not.
you see successful alums like yourself, it makes us be proud that
Thank you
we're doing
so
a great
very
job. So
much.
thank you,
Thank you
appreciate
so
it.
very much. I'm humbled for all those kind comments. I am definitely a proud RIT alumni,
Thanks.
and I'm looking forward to the future direction of like potential partnership with RIT. And thank you so very much for the time.
My pleasure.
And I'm glad that RIT College of Science is being run by a right person
Thank you,
at the
appreciate
right
it.
time.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. And like we like to say, go Tigers. Thank
Go
you.
Tigers.
Thank you.